Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV and proving once again how many different ways there are to be a historian. My guest today is Erin Faith Allen, making documentaries, researching over 300 projects for families and authors. Her work encompasses many disciplines. So welcome. I'm looking forward to this one. How are you today, Erin?
Hi there. I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. So this How to Be a Historian series, when I started it, and it was kind of a random thing, Alex was Churchill was on first. And I even when I kind of started it, I hadn't really anticipated how many different branches of sharing history there are. And you do a extraordinarily wide variety of things. So before we get into your PowerPoint and things, I mean, your websites, I will stress, folks, are in the description below. Do you have a particular label you like to give yourself when you refer to yourself as, I am a historian, archivist, researcher, but what's the preferred term?
Oh, that's such a great question. So I sort of coined my own term. I call myself an investigative war historian because I'm not a military historian.
Yeah.
I don't specifically just do military, although that's a huge part of what I do. So yeah, investigative war historian.
Which is a great label. So what we're going to do, folks, is we've got some slides that we're going to go through, but we're going to talk generally about history, but then we'll also open up some questions and we're going to talk about where we are in 2025 in different types of people sharing history, the elephant in the room being women in history. Are we progressing? Are we moving forward with that? Is it better than it was a few years ago? I think the answer is yes to all of those, but with some tentative yes, but maybe not as fast as it should be moving. But we'll bring up your slides, and folks, this will be a good chat. So fire away with the comments. But and this tell me when to nudge on the slides. But yeah, how to be a historian. Over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Paul. So when you invited me to be on this series, I of course said yes. I was very excited to pop on here and share what I do, but I sort of, after I said yes, I was like, how to be a historian? What are we going to even talk about? And it really forced me to think about how I have become a historian, which was really, the school of hard knocks in a way, and no traditional university. So I took it literally, and I thought, let's talk through how I became a historian, because I know there are plenty of people out there in the world like me who maybe didn't go to school, but who are just obsessed with history. So hopefully this will inspire. So I went straight into the internet and said, how to be a historian, literally the title of your series. And this is what the internet spat back at me. Everybody can see on their screen. It's going to school, it's writing papers, it's teaching university is the traditional path, and it's a respectable path. And it is certainly a path I have many times in my life wished that I had taken, but I didn't. You can go ahead and flick on to the next one.
And we should just touch on the fact, fraught with lots of problems. I mean, I can't tell you how many of my friends who are in conventional academic history are worried about universities closing down programs, reducing funding. Some incredible historians who've got a legacy of incredible work going back decades are genuinely worried about the future. So it's definitely a route to history, but it's not necessarily the one that's the most paved with gold and certainty.
Yeah, that's true. I'm not sure anything is anymore, to be honest. So I think we all just have to find our own way in this world. And, this was mine. I didn't do any of those things. I did history classes and occasional, touchdowns into university here and there, but I didn't ever complete a degree. It was the road less traveled for me, for sure. So I'm going to take you all the way back to the very beginning. And when I was a little girl, there were three things that I was obsessed with, that I really wanted to be when I grew up. And they all sort of were held at the same time, though they rotated. So the very first thing was I wanted to be an artist. And I have a ton of artists in my life. That's a whole other story, but it's just a genetic thing for me to create. It's an impulse, and I have to do it. So I just wanted to be an artist when I grew up. And then the second thing that I wanted to be was a detective. I was obsessed.
And well done for introducing a photo of Magnum PI. That's the first time he's come up in a World War II TV show, and yeah, it's I love it when those random things come into people's presentations. It's always cool.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of funny. I mean, I was laughing at myself while I was doing this, but yes, Magnum PI was a huge influence on me. I was obsessed with Magnum when I was a little girl. Like obsessed. I mean, I'm talking like 7, 8, 9 years old. I wanted to be a detective. I wanted to find the answers. I didn't care about the Ferrari. I just wanted to find the answers. And then I was also obsessed with Nancy Drew, mystery stories, Trixie Belden. I read constantly. I was a bookworm. I devoured books. And so this detective thing came into my life at a young age. And then around the same time, about 9, 10 years old, a family friend gave me a National Geographic, this National Geographic with Pompeii on the cover, and something happened inside of me when I opened this magazine and read about Pompeii. It's very hard for me to explain, but it was this appreciation of the impermanence of life and how quickly it ends and how it can stay forever if someone pays attention and documents it. It was a really big, profound moment for me. So all of these things were brewing when I was a little girl. And then my biggest influence in my life was my father in this work, because you can see these photos of my dad. This is him after Vietnam. He came home from Vietnam and he was not okay. And I didn't know my father. He left before I was born. And the story that I grew up with was that he couldn't be a dad because of war, because of Vietnam. So that landed pretty heavily with me. And, you know, as time went on, I learned other things about him. But this really stayed with me. And I was given a folder of his songs that he wrote about the war. And as you can see, this is a portion of one of them. And so I'm a young girl. I want to know my dad, and this is all I can know, are these songs about how awful war is. And then my grandfathers. They both were very influential in my path because I didn't know them either. I knew one grandfather sort of, but the other one I didn't know, but I knew that they were in World War II. And I was like really hungry to understand. As my interest in history evolved, I was very hungry to understand their wars. So those 3 veterans were the first veterans in my life. And so now we're going to fast forward to 2009 when I moved to London. And I got married. I married a Brit, and I was absolutely hit in the face with living history because it's all around in London and in England in ways that it was not in my life in America the way I had been living. And my husband, the Brit, whose name is Simon, he was really into history. So I had World War II history in my face all the time. And as I sort of mentioned to you, Paul, before we came live, I had this longing to understand World War II and to like really dive into it. And I'd kind of dipped into it here and there, but I withheld myself from it because, you know, it's a man's world. What's a woman like me going to do in a world like that? And it was just sort of this whole complex I carried. So what I would do instead is instead of pursuing it myself, is I would go into Waterstones and I would buy Simon stacks of World War II books. And he would read them and we'd talk about them, but I just like kind of never let myself go all the way into it.
Did that just before we move on, that moving to Great Britain, to London, is that there's this argument to be made that the USA, because the USA never had bombers fall on it, you know, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii was not part of the USA. We had Holly on yesterday talking about the defense of Alaska, but not part of the USA. In London, everybody endured World War II. Everybody in Liverpool, everyone in Birmingham, Glasgow. So did that maybe have an impact that it is World War II is a people's war. So therefore there's no reason why a woman can't talk about it, because that London shows you that it is. You can still see the cut off railings where they were taken away for the war effort. You can still see post-war railings made out of World War II stretchers. You can see the bomb damage. You can see the memorials there. Do you think that being there helped you realize that, in a sense, anybody can talk about World War II, specifically of the wars?
I think it really did. I mean, Simon was very encouraging as well. Finding out the house I was living in had been, the original house had been obliterated in the Blitz. People's nans were, they were telling me stories about what their nan did during the war. Like that's just a beautiful way to say it. It's a people's war. And it was in my face all the time. And my hunger to learn about it just expanded and grew. And yes, I mean, here it is. I experienced how the British do history, which is, very different from how Americans do history. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but it was constantly in my face. I call it living history because it still felt alive to me.
And yet Britain is still dealing, the conventional opinion of middle-aged grumpy men is that they're not teaching World War II in schools anymore. And that's universal in the USA, Canada, Great Britain, Australia. There is this sense that we're just not talking about it. And I, to many degrees, disagree with that. There are projects, kids are getting involved in things. I think it's a cliched view to say that it's not being taught anymore. And I'm glad that you're giving this positive message about Britain and its past, because I think it gets lost a bit.
Yeah, I mean, that was my experience of it, was that it was so alive and everywhere all the time. Like there was a different way of remembering it in the present tense every day rather than on Veterans Day, which had been my prior experience. And, that could have been what I was exposed to here in this country. Who knows? But this was my experience of how the whole world opened up to me when I went to England. And then this was the moment. I went with Simon to the 2013 commemorations at Normandy. But before we went, he said, "Erin, I know you. I promise you, I know you try not to read all this stuff and engage in it, but read this book because it's going to give you a different experience when we go to the commemorations." And so I did. I read this book. And then we, got on the ferry, landed, went to the commemorations, and like the world exploded for me. And I've never turned back. It was so profound to be on the beaches, to see the veterans, to be at the Ham and Jam midnight ceremony at Pegasus. And I really feel in many ways I was truly born in that moment. It was amazing. So thank you, Simon. And thank you to all the wonderful people who work so hard to keep history alive, because it really, really woke me up that day, that weekend. Brilliant. So from then on, I just started to travel all over Europe, continued obsessively reading books. Fortunately, had a huge stash I had bought for Simon already, and began to really feel my instinct for research wake up. And my curiosity was spinning everywhere, and it was amazing. It was a really wonderful time. I remember one of the first books I read was In the Garden of Beasts by Erik Larson. Oh my gosh, I'll never forget reading that book and just being like, oh, this is amazing.
I mean, it's odd because there's a lot of us watching who literally cannot remember not being interested in World War II. People often say to me, so when did it start? And I go, it must have started when I was very, very young. I mean, my mum gave me pictures I was doing of Spitfires when I was 5 and 6 years old. So I never had that kind of, as you said, like a born again moment where World War II wasn't much of a thing and then almost overnight became a thing. It had always been a thing. And I think we're going to touch on this, whether there's a male difference to history and World War II history and a female difference, that's something kind of in us. And it's, my mum and dad gave me toy soldiers as a kid, which obviously kickstarted something. They didn't give my sister toy soldiers. They gave her dolls' houses and whatever else she got. So I wonder whether we are going to talk about sexism in the industry and the difference between male historians and women historians, or there is no difference, folks, but there's different experiences. And it's just intriguing that there can be a moment where you can sort of become a World War II historian, because I can't relate to that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And I should tell you that there were hints all along that this was my destiny. Like, I remember reading The Hiding Place when I was 9. I can remember the sofa in my living room, sitting on the sofa with this book and reading about Ravensbrück concentration camp, which remains to this day to be one of my main areas of interest. But reading about the cruelty, the female guards, and reading, like, just my mind was like, how does this even happen? How does this happen? And then when I was about 18 or 19, I went through a stint where I would go with my mom, who was going to college. I would go to her college with her, and I would go to the library, and I would go check out all the books on Germany and the Holocaust. And then I had to stop because I got so engrossed in it that it started to take over, like, truly. And I just, for whatever reason, couldn't let that happen. So there were seeds of it all along, but I stopped trying to hold up the dam in 2013 in Normandy.
Wow. Well, this is fantastic. We're enjoying the conversation. We've got lots more slides to go, and I'm looking forward to the chats we have later on. So, when I saw your slides, I like the fact that already you're confronting the fact that you get the interest, but then it raises all these complicated questions of and how researching history isn't always a straightforward process.
Yeah. So one of the things that has just kind of become my thing is answering difficult questions and taking on complex cases, like the things that nobody thinks you can figure out, or it's just, it's not solvable or whatever. That is where I seem to thrive. And I really cut my teeth on complicated research when I solved the mystery of my great-grandmother, who I think is on the next slide. Yes. Yeah. So I'm not going to talk about my genealogy expertise, but this is really important because my grandmother was adopted, and her whole journey through life was very difficult and very fraught because of this. And she spent her whole life trying to figure out who her birth parents were. And right around the time I was going to Normandy, it was around 2013, I cracked the case of my great-grandmother, who my great-grandmother was. She was this woman named Elsie, and I became obsessed with Elsie for a time. And I tracked down every cousin I could find, and I asked all kinds of questions about Elsie. So this woman went from being a black hole of not even having a name and an identity to, I have boxes filled with photos and stories about this woman. And where that led me was a place of deep healing in myself around things that had happened in my family that had had a huge impact, not for good, on me. And so I began to learn the power of chasing things down like a freaking hound dog to find what I wanted. And because I got it, I got all of it. I had all the questions answered. And so that's where I really cut my research teeth. The next thing that happened, again, around this same time, was I remembered this man I knew when I was a kid, whose dad was a liberator of a concentration camp. His dad's name was Bill Parks. You can see him on the screen. And so I decided I wanted to try to find out, Bill Parks' story. So long story short, I found out that Bill was a liberator of Gunskirchen in Austria, which is a subcamp of Mauthausen. I also found out that Bill shot the locks off the gates of Mauthausen so that his platoon could go inside, and they were the first on the scene, and they have the credit of liberating Gunskirchen. So when I brought this back to his son Stephen was in tears. He had no idea because, of course, his dad never talked about the war, which is just so very common. And Stephen said to me, and I think this is on the next slide, Paul, he said, my father was one tough son of a bitch. I'll never forget it. Those were his exact words, keeping all of that inside of him for all of those years. And it released something in Stephen to understand why his father had been so rigid and hard about the war and other things in their lives. And the healing that he experienced from that little bit of information it made an impact on me. I thought, oh, this is amazing. People can like cleanse their souls a little bit over this kind of thing. And again, another calling emerged, and I was hot on the trail from then.
And this is where, you know, my admiration for what you do is because it is also a process about the healing of the human spirit. And people are probably watching this going, oh my God, Woody's going off on one now, rolling their eyes. But the point is, just researching facts, just looking for tables and saying, okay, this unit left this camp on this date and arrived on this boat in this place, and on this day this number of people died. That's important history. We need those bare bones to be able to build up stories. But without the examination of what these men went through and how it affected the world around them and how it affected their post-war years, you know, that the best books for me about people who served in World War II are the ones that talk about what happened to them after the war. Did this person go back and just pick up life as if nothing had gone wrong, or did it turn them onto a difficult route that affected their marriage, their children? And to me, that's what keeps me going with this World War II TV thing now, is the understanding of the whys, and why do these people do that, and what can make a Nazi officer go and, you know, murder people during the day, but then go back home and play with his children on the carpet in the living room with a toy train. How can that work? And I like the fact that your difficult research can be about the difficulty in tracing documents, but it can also be difficult in terms of what you're going to discover about the people and about, I guess, yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm one of those living witnesses to the legacy of war, because one of my grandfathers in particular was very traumatized from fighting the Japanese. And then my father, who I didn't even have in my life, you know, war is an insidious beast. It is not just the front lines. And that is the place where my real passion lives. And, you know, this kind of swings all the way back to that National Geographic too. It's like the individual life that is worth knowing and understanding.
And, you know, and you're an artist as well. And it would, when I was looking at your various websites, I was thinking, well, it's separate parts of your life, but of course it's not, because one is clearly going to affect the other. I mean, I've got a friend in Normandy here, Nigel, who is a tour guide, but he's also been a painter. You know, he's an artist, and that's what he's done. He's had exhibitions. I've been to his exhibitions, and you can see his World War II his character coming through in his artwork, because you can't separate them. So, you know, how does the World War II part of your life affect your art life, and vice versa?
Oh gosh, they're inseparable. They really are. I mean, I had a really hard time when I lived in England. I'm back in the States now, but when I lived in England and I was traveling, you know, all through the concentration camps and things all the time, and reading all these books that are just like, you just want to throw up sometimes. It's so evil and horrible, the things that happened. The only way I could process that was to like churn it out, like purge it through my artwork. So, I mean, I wrote on the slide, I made a ton of art about it, but I have a ton of art about it. These women that you see on your screen these are mugshots of women taken by the Vienna Gestapo. They're women who ended up in Ravensbrück. And so I spent a week in Ravensbrück, and then I came home, and I just I still work with these women, with these photos. They just become a part of my own visual language.
Wow.
So yeah, I started to gather up discarded, unwanted things. Like I remember going to the War and Peace show one year in England, in Kent, and this guy was literally selling rusted old, like oozing, dripping, crusty rust, things that he'd pulled out of a battlefield somewhere. I don't even remember where. And I was like, oh, I want it all. I got the whole lot for like £5 or something. So I just started to like kind of need to touch all these items as well, and then bring them into my work, and then also bring the elements of the place into it. So like, this is one of my art journals in a lake in Germany. I'm just soaking the pages in the lake. So it just has become a whole part of my process. I'm out there in the field talking to the people or walking the battlefield, but I'm also picking up the rusty nail, bringing it home. And so the next few slides are some of my work.
No, and it's amazing work, and you can see when looking at it, you can see what processes you're going through investigating the past, and I have those dilemmas, not dilemmas, but after a particularly harrowing show, we've done them on the T4 experiments by the Nazis, we've done them about, Holocaust victims, Bataan Death March, it's always a bit of a tricky step to kind of build myself back up and go and watch TV after. But it's for me, I wouldn't not have that process. I mean, if it just became about facts and sharing information, I would very quickly get bored with it, because I want to feel those moments of, blimey, someone's explaining their history of their family member, and it's moving me, and it because that's why we remember, I suppose. That's why we are drawn to it. It's the human interest stories. But yeah, it's amazing. And folks, like, as I said at the beginning, there are plenty of links to Erin's projects in the description below, so go and spend time after this having a look at all her work. Yeah, do you want to give us a commentary about these photos as we move through, or do other people read the, what do you want to say? Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my favorite processes. So using rust, you can use various liquids to drag the rust into the paper or the fabric. And to me, that's just, I struggle to talk about my art, because it's an experience that transcends words that I can spew out of my mouth. But it's really about the transference of time for me and bringing the past into the future, I think.
Yeah, amazing. And again, as I said at the beginning, the fact that being a historian encompasses all these different disciplines, and they overlap, and they're different, and we all have different ways of expressing it. But yeah, the art and World War II seems sometimes to be sort of contradictory to each other, but clearly it's all part of how you do it and who you are.
Yeah, it's very. Yeah, it's just very, very much who I am. I mean, it's my DNA, right? It's like the war that I was born into, the warriors in my family, the men who came before me, and they were also artists and very sensitive, sort of eccentric, poetic men. So I think I'm just like them in a female body.
We had a question from do you speak foreign language? Do you speak German? Do you speak French when you travel to these places?
That's an amazing question. It's very well timed. So I know a little German. I've proactively learned it through, apps and things like that. But also I binge watch more World War II movies than probably all of you put together. No, I'm just kidding. I don't even think that's possible. But I've picked up a lot of German from watching movies about the war with subtitles. And I'm also in this moment, I'm finishing up some training on being able to read the old German script. And so I'm upping my game in the German right now, big time.
Brilliant stuff. And and it's difficult, it's complicated. The more accurate analysis and research you want to do, the more extra disciplines you need to start mastering. And it's amazing how frequently on social media someone is looking at a letter written by a veteran, they just can't read it, and they put it to all their friends because does that say together, does that say through? And even just getting into the habit of understanding how people wrote 80 years ago takes some time, because we are a digital era people now, and people wrote better back then, but it can be very alien to our modern eyes.
Oh yeah, it's a whole different ball game. It's a really tricky thing, and it takes time and patience, and who has that anymore?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's some of the art. And now, the other thing you're doing that we're going to really explore is the personal research and looking into the archives, because time and time again, I'm responding to comments saying, when people say, I want to find out about my grandfather, and I say, have you got his service documents? Have you been to this website? And I point people in certain directions. But that to say that's a rabbit hole and how to research, there is no one single route. But what does, when you're researching projects, you take on a variety of types of projects, you obviously have these core skill sets. So take us through those.
Yeah, so when I get a new case, the very first thing I always ask for is exactly what you just said, Paul, which is, do you have the service documents? Do you have a service number? What do you have? You know, that, because I never want to do work that somebody has already done, right? So usually people don't have much. And so it becomes a matter of hitting up their military file, if it still exists in St. Louis. I'm sure anybody who's ever looked for American records knows that there was a huge, horrendous fire that I will never get over in all of my life in 1973. And hi, Ben, I see your comment. So 1973 in St. Louis burned, I think, 17 million American Army and Air Force records. And so many people don't know how to get a hold of their dad's service if the fire took the record out. But I'm here to tell you that there is a way. It requires time, love, and tenderness, as the saying goes, but it can be done. You just have to pull together different unit records. Morning reports are a huge, huge, huge asset to build a military record. And it really depends on what you're looking for. Some people are perfectly fine with just a small amount of information, but the more you go down the rabbit hole, the more paperwork there is. So it's just a matter of wading through exactly what the end goal is and then piecing it together from there.
And I think that must be a not necessarily a difficult conversation you have with people, but what do you want to find out? Because you can be entering into, in a sense, the mental health of someone who served in World War II and what they witnessed, and the version, if it's someone who survived the war but didn't talk about it, they may have kind of dismissed their involvement in some heavier things. Yep. And then you as the researcher then start uncovering, dark history. And so, do you have these conversations with your clients? And well, you just said you did, about what they're expecting and what types of information they're hoping, because some people just sort of want that timeline. They want to know where that person was, but others it's more of that, but why was he the person he became?
Yeah, I tend to get a lot of those cases. And I think because of my own background, again, another story for another day, but I have a very strong depth of understanding about trauma and what trauma does to the body and the brain and the psyche and to the people around that person. I've gone through some training to understand the somatics of trauma itself. So I have background in how to talk about these difficult subjects. I've also lived through it myself. And so I have like a core instinctual just understanding of how to talk about it, what it means, and how to just be with it. Sometimes you don't even need to say anything overtly. It's how you are with a person that makes the difference.
No, absolutely. And you have these core values that you're gonna take us through.
Yeah. So these are my sort of driving forces. The first one is empathy. It is, I think I really already said it. It is so important to me to treat each family like they're my own, and to convey that it's okay to be, confused or have questions. I had one amazing case that sort of illustrates this. Somebody came to me and said, my father, every year around his birthday, would get very upset. And the family whispers were that it had to do with something that happened in the war. And so long amazing story short, really, I was able to track his birthday, which, the family obviously gave me his birth date. And I was able to find that he was with a bomb crew in the Pacific. And obviously they trained together. It's a brotherhood. They all knew each other very well. There was proof of that. They were all, went through the training together. We're on the same missions together. And one year, like 3 days before his birthday, he was ill and he did not go up on the bombing raid. And of course, all the men on the raid were killed, but he survived. And so he lost all of his best friends 3 days before his birthday. And when the family understood this and had proof of something that had been kind of like lingering in the whispered, kind of shadowy corners of their lives, again, it's like what Bill Park's son said, like, this just explains everything. And they could like find closure and peace. And that's what the empathy piece is for me, is reaching into those like dark places and being able to deep dive, find the answers and pull them out and offer them with tenderness. Truly.
Yeah. I mean, this is where some of my experience when I was doing the battlefield guiding and my colleagues who are watching it, Colin's watching others, is that we've all had these moments on tours where you realize there's been some incident in the war that's been hanging over a family, either openly or in the background, that has caused these things of maybe a previous family or I remember there was one particular case where a family found out their mother had had a previous relationship before they were around. She'd married someone who was killed in the war and then remarried afterward, and they didn't know she had had a partner in the war, and it came out on the tour, and there was no hostility. It was just sort of surprise. And this is when people say, yeah, why are you interested in World War II? It's all in the past. Well, it absolutely isn't, is it? There are people in the sidebar talking about their own experiences, researching their grandfathers, their grandparents, and what demons there still are in families caused by this terrible tragic event, and you don't always know what you're going to uncover. Another story I remember, I'm going to hand it back to you, is I was in Point du Hoc in one of the underground barrack block buildings there years and years ago, and there was a family who was they were American, but they were slightly posh. They were slightly too well dressed for a battlefield tour, and the grandmother was wearing kind of lacy sort of dress gloves, which you just don't see on a battlefield tour. And it turned out, I'm doing a very short version of the story, when I was talking about the construction of the Atlantic Wall and slave labor, she had been a slave laborer in World War II and had had that permanent damage to her fingertips because of pouring caustic cement in World War II, and always wore gloves. As an adult, for the rest of her life. And her family knew she always wore gloves, and she knew she had some issue with her fingertips, but she'd never actually sat there and goes, this is where it came from. And it all came out in an underground at Point du Hoc. And I'm now this accidental facilitator for this. And they're all now hugging each other because she took her gloves off in front of, and she showed me first, weirdly. She said, because I was the one explaining about slave labor being, they're having to, they're not being fed well, they're not bad. And so she showed me and her family all craning to see her fingers. And it was like, none of us had seen that coming. And
that's amazing.
And I'm sure every guide has those moments where something comes out that has been there in this family for decades.
Yeah. And how precious that is, that moment where that woman decided, oh, here's a man who understands what I went through, so I'm gonna reveal myself. That's huge.
And it's just, and partly because I'm a stranger, because it's that dealing with a neutral therapist, is that maybe actually sitting her family down, they'd have been too emotional, she'd have started crying, they'd have started crying, but because I was just giving a battlefield tour, there was a distance between her and I, so she just felt it was the right time. And I could do an Ask Me Anything where I just relate these amazing experiences that I've had and other guides have had. It's, they don't happen every day. I was guiding for 17, 18 years or something, and I've had like 10 or 12 of those incidents, but they do happen. And and as you say, that's why empathy is, the minute you start delving into family histories, which is what searching for an individual's records are, empathy is required. If you just, as we said earlier, if you just want to look at the battle log of a particular LST and where it went over the Pacific, you can do that with a detachment. But the minute people get involved, amazing stuff. So next one, persistence, and this is where I can the floor is yours.
Oh my gosh, this is persistence. I mean, I am like rabbit hole diva. Like, I will not stop. I just won't. You can ask anyone who knows me, for better or for worse. I'm like I don't know, like a wild dog with a bone or something. I just can't give up. And I cannot even tell you how many times, especially when I was like just starting out. I mean, it's a whole labyrinth, military history. It is unbelievably hard to even begin to articulate to anyone who's outside of it how complicated and intricate and interwoven, and this is over here, but that's over there. But you have to learn this whole separate encyclopedic, language to even begin to approach it. So I would, go to people a lot and be like, oh, what is it? How do I? And oh, you can't find that. You're never gonna. Guess what? Every time I listened to that, I ended up figuring out later that I shouldn't have listened to that, because it ended up being, findable or true or whatever. Or I just didn't listen and kept going and would uncover like the craziest, most amazing thing. It's like a instinct. Like, I don't know what it is, but I just know when there's something more. And
just I know we were talking about the emotional aspect a minute ago, but on a kind of a practical level, we're in a kind of a transition era now where we are not in the old days where you had to go to archives and request documents and they wheeled them back and you had to look at them. We're still in that era, but there are now digital records online, but not by no means are all of the World War II records. I mean, maybe even 10% haven't been digitalized yet. So are we in a case where it's kind of almost 2 steps forward, 1 step back, in that there's now, and I certainly deal with people in my emails that think all the answers can be found on the internet. And I go, no, they absolutely cannot be found on the internet. The internet will be your starting point. Yeah. So, we're obviously nowhere near getting to the era where it's all going to be online. So are things better now, or are people expecting things to just be available instantaneously?
I mean, I think, again, if you don't know how it all works and links together, you might think like, oh, they told me the file burned, so game over. But I think people just don't even know how to even begin processing where to find things. Like you mentioned a bit ago, and we see in Facebook groups or whatever all the time, people saying, how do I get my dad's military record? And those are not online in the States. I know you guys in England and Britain have like way better access to
it's
online.
Getting there. The First World War records were available a few years ago. Now the World War II ones are starting to come out there. But again, there's this assumption that because some is there, that's all there is. You go, no, they're putting this stuff out as fast as they can with limited funding, limited personnel. And of course, that's the other issue is the more stuff becomes digitalized, the more these organizations think, well, we don't need as many human staff. And so they start getting rid of that, relying on databases and search engines, which of course have their massive, great limitations. There's nothing better. I remember going to the Public Records Office years ago and actually speaking to a human being and saying, look, this is what I'm trying to do. And they'd go, and they would tell you the process. And you can't beat actual human interaction.
Oh, totally agree. And also, if anyone is in the position to be able to go to an archive, do it.
Yeah.
It is so amazing. Like, I am truly at my happiest in life when I have exactly this kind of stack of paper in front of me. This is from College Park. This is a unit journal, I think. Like, it is the most incredible experience because you're touching documents that were, typed out by a clerk, just behind the front line 80 flipping years ago. Like, that's amazing. It's so cool. But to answer your question, I think, people have varying levels of expectation of what is findable. And again, it just depends on what people are looking for. I mean, if you're looking for a citation to prove an award, you have to go to the archives for that. You're not going to find that online, most likely. Maybe needle in a haystack, but it just depends on what you're looking for. I know that the IDPFs, the American IDPFs, which are the deceased personnel files, I think A through C, a large part of A through C are now on the National Archives catalog. So little bits and pieces.
And the IDPF, you know, I've acquired them myself, and sometimes you get reams of information back with maps and details, and the next time you get 3 pages that tells you nothing you didn't know already. So
Yeah.
when the limited advice I give to people is be realistic with your hopes. You know, do not think that one request to one archive is going to give you everything there. It'll give you a little bit if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And if you know how to use it, it'll give you that edge piece of the jigsaw that allows you to find the next piece. But that'll mean more legwork, more communication, more, and as you say, visiting archives. And please make sure the sidebar don't think that in any way I'm saying that archives should be replaced by digital. Of course, I'm not saying that. We will also need visitable archives, but the digital world can assist in the future, and it is already assisting us. But persistence, and then the next one, curiosity. I like that one.
Yeah. We're back to my rabbit hole. I just stay open. I just stay open to all possibilities, all research pathways. Anytime I like decide a scenario, I've trained myself to track my brain. Like if I decide, oh, this is what happened, I immediately backpedal. Like I don't know that until I know that. And I have seen this in a lot of people. This is kind of along the same lines as like, I don't take no for an answer. Mm-hmm. It's like people decide something happened, but we don't know that till we track all the paper. Yeah. And all the paper is usually there if you know who to talk to and if you're persistent and if you don't take no for an answer.
And I think this is where we can talk about this later. The neutrality of someone like yourself doing the research is that you haven't got a single goal at the end of it. It's just more information is your goal, but more information can take you down different directions. Whereas a family, if they were doing their own research, might just be looking to find out where was granddad on this particular date, because that's when he would get emotional, whatever it be. But a genuine neutral researcher will, like a scientist, is where does the evidence lead me, as opposed to am I trying to find the conclusion I've already drawn, which is never a good way of going into history. And David O'Keefe is in the sidebar, and all his work on Enigma and the real reasons for the Dieppe raid. If he'd gone in there looking to support the conventional narrative, he would never have found the information he did that in the end created a new version of that story there. So I think being open to all possibilities, and you must have had some absolute mouth on floor, gobsmacked moments of this is completely not the direction I thought this is going to go.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, without a doubt. I love the example you just gave, and it's very, very true. I mean, this is how new books are written. This is how new research is uncovered by people who just go in and hungrily devour the information, follow all the rabbit holes, and end up coughing up some brand new archive that hasn't seen the light of day in 100 years or whatever. And
because often they're just in the wrong place. I think it was fairly recently, Ben Main was looking for something. I think it was Ben on Zedwin. And in a file he wasn't expecting, there was something, it may have been Dan Ellin at the Bomber Command, but someone found the document that essentially had been filed in the wrong place, but opened up a whole another avenue of research about something else they were interested in, but they weren't expecting to find it in that particular folder on that particular day. And it's, that's why, again, someone like yourself who has the broad interest, you might find something on one case that in the end has a bearing on another case you thought you'd finished 3 years ago, but hang on, that's that same unit, that must be that same battle, and suddenly there's a connection made between what didn't seem to be connected cases.
Absolutely. And that's the thrill of it. And that's the hunger. That's the curiosity, is having had those experiences and knowing how possible it is. And so then you kind of like get addicted to it, and you just wait for the next time it happens. But you also know the only way you're going to have that happen is if you pursue it.
Yeah. Well, we've got a couple of slides to go, then we'll kind of move into the open part of the conversation. So let's take us through the last images.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, even though I took the road less traveled, I still became the artist, the detective, and the archaeologist. And I hope Magnum PI is really proud of me.
Yeah, it was he 80 recently, Tom Selleck? That made me feel insanely old. I think he was 80 recently. It was like, how can Magnum be 80? But that's all my pop star heroes of my youth are getting old, and they're well on their way to being, if they're not already pensioners, they're getting that way, and it just makes me feel old.
I know I'm totally dating myself here, but I just, he's always whatever 40 to me. And
yeah.
If I ever got to meet that man, I'm not like a starstruck person. I don't really care about that, but I'd probably pass out if I ever met Tom Selleck.
Well, if he's watching, Tom, reach out to Erin and we can get it. Maybe he's got a relative he wants to research.
Yeah,
who knows?
I'm your girl. So yeah, it's amazing it was amazing to put this presentation together. I actually really have to thank you, Paul, for inviting me on the show, because it really kind of forced me to narrow my focus into myself for a change and think about how I ended up where I am, like 10, 12 years later. I've had the most amazing experiences, met the most amazing people. I live with a profound sense of excitement and satisfaction and purpose in life. And, my own personal experiences with the scars of war and the scars of trauma itself, kind of wouldn't trade it for the world, because it gives me a connection, just a connection to all the people who've been touched by war. And here's a little secret: we all have been.
Well, yes, absolutely. And there, the last slide there is the details. The same websites are in the description below, so you can click on them later on. And I'm glad that we're ending this kind of first part with real positive vibes from you, because it is fantastic to be involved in history. We are a great community here on World War II TV. There's lots of positives, but there are some darker sides. And the reason I particularly reached out to you recently was something on Facebook I put about women historians and things like that. And we're not going to be all negative now, but there is still some prejudice about women getting involved in World War II. Why are you doing that? You didn't serve. Without going into some of the worst details, it's obviously something you've experienced. What are your feelings about it?
It's really fascinating. I used to take it really personally. In fact, it was a part of the reason I kind of stayed in the war closet for a long time, because I was concerned about, who's this woman? What does she think she's doing? And, it's real. I've actually had it confirmed by people who've met me and tell me and worked with me and then tell me later, yeah, I was like, I saw you walk in the door and I was like, who does this woman think she is? Just because of the moment of impact. And I think as humans, we are made to make snap decisions. It's a part of our wiring. It's like the safety thing, the tribal mentality thing. So I get like the bigger picture of why people snap judge. But my personal favorite thing about that topic is that I finally, I think for the most part, made peace with it. And I'm like my own secret weapon. It's like, I'm confident that I know what I'm doing. I'm confident that if I don't know the answer, I'll find someone who can help me find the answer. Like I'm human just like everyone else, and I'm good at what I do. And so somebody wants to think that I can't because I'm blonde.
It's interesting because there's echoes of Mag, who's in the other room. When she was working for a company in Normandy as a tour guide, people would just book a tour and have no idea who was going to turn up to give that tour. Now she's an independent guide. They've obviously booked her through her website, so they know exactly who they're getting, and then expectations are met. But there was the time when she hadn't been guiding very long, when definitely male guests would just look at her and go, oh, a girl, oh, a bloody girl's going to talk to me about World War II. And then she would know she would have to work that much harder. Yeah. Because the guy has made some kind of immediate reaction that, and maybe literally or figuratively kind of folded his arms and, well, what does she know? And then you have to work hard. And the first of these shows, which I mentioned at the beginning with Alex Churchill, is having to work that much harder as a woman, because you're starting from maybe a minus position. Me, a middle-aged guy, white guy, what's that meme that says when you get to 40 years old in America, you have to become interested as a man in World War II or smoking meat,
Yeah.
or in some cases. And that meme is so true, in that there's a complete expectation that a middle-aged guy will be making models of Sherman tanks in his spare room and have a John Wayne World War II movie box set on his. But we're still not in an environment where there's an assumption that a historian about the war can be a woman, and we're not quite out of that yet, are we? I mean, we're moving along, aren't we? We're moving forward.
Yeah, when I first started out, I felt like my perception was at the time that there was no one else, no other female out there who was overtly calling themselves war historian or a hobbyist or whatever. And now there are so many women around. I don't know if that's because I've just like kind of fallen into the the network, and so I'm able to find them, but it's an amazing thing to see. And I have to say too, like, I have had the most incredible connections and support from males and from male historians. Like, absolutely, like, my biggest champions have been men. So it's not a blanket statement. It's just that on occasions, there have been times when I have felt on the receiving end of that sort of stereotyping. Like, I can tell you a story from the War and Peace show, maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago. It was when I was first starting out and I was collecting. I'm a trained photographer, so photography is one of my passions. So I was collecting photos from World War II. And I went into a tent, and the guy asked me if he had tons of photo albums everywhere. And he said, hi, what are you looking for? And I said, oh, I'm just looking for, albums, World War II photos. And he goes, nurses' albums are over there. I was like, no, I'm looking for like not nurses' albums. That's not what I'm here for. So to me, that one can't be explained away. That was a blatant, this is a woman, she wants a nurse's album.
I mean, we had this discussion before going live, and we are moving forward. But when I started this, and I was making contacts with different groups and organizations around the world, and there was various sort of social media groups, women who do history, etc., etc., and it clearly, the gatekeepers have had their gate knocked down. Women have been pushing their way in, because there was no way you were going to hang around and wait for the invite, because in all walks of life, you've had to make your own path. And the reason we now have history being talked about by people of different color and different gender and different sex is because they forced their way in, because the male gatekeepers were never going to open that gate willingly. I mean, I'm talking about a generation ago, if I'm being honest, rather than the current generation. But there was still this expectancy, and whether it's still there, that, okay, you can come in, but here are your lanes. It's Rosie the Riveter, it's nurses, it's women agents in the SOE, it's the experience of home life, it's land army, that kind of thing. And it still seems a bit odd, and it shouldn't, that women can write about the Battle of Stalingrad or tank, armor. It will change, won't it? But we're not quite there yet.
Yeah. I think there's room to grow everywhere in all topics in life, where it comes with, humans coming into contact with other humans. And I think that this is definitely one of them. And I'm finally really proud to be a female who calls herself a war historian. And it's, I hit another level of difficulty too, in this, not just because I'm a woman, but because I'm also an artist. And so there's this like weird culture clash between the two worlds, where people, if they think I'm a war historian, if they're in the art community and they think they hear I'm a war historian, they snap judge to, oh, she must be this certain kind of person then, which I'm not. Or the opposite, the military community, oh, she's an artist, she must be that specific type of person, which I'm not. So I'm, me, and I bring my own set of, quirks and understandings to every situation, just like you do, Paul. And we have
I just think it's clearly ridiculous that anyone would hold any kind of prejudice about any difference, whether it's color, gender, color, whatever it is, because we said at the beginning, especially with World War II, it's a global war. It's a people's war. Everybody from the ages of 0 up to 100 are involved in it in some aspect. And of course, everybody's views about that war is in some ways relevant. The civilian experience, the military experience, the military who went overseas, the military who didn't go overseas, the different nations, the different ages. And of course, the more perspectives on that conflict we get, the better our understanding is going to be of it. But, the bold fact is I do the analysis of my own channel and what works, and shows with women guests get between 20 and 35% fewer views on average than with male guests. And if it's a female guest with maybe a more female oriented subject, even fewer views. So a man talking about aircraft will do better than a woman talking about something more home front related. Now, the thing about YouTube is I am only in regular contact with about 1% of my actual audience. The people in the sidebar now, the people who I need comment and who leave comments. And so you're lulled into thinking you have a representative swathe of your audience, but the reality is I'm only dealing with a tiny percentage. They're the ones that are actively involved, and so I judge them because they're a great lot. They're tolerant, they're open, they like different subjects, but I can't really predict who the 95% silent people are because they don't interact with me. But certainly they are making decisions based on different aspects. Some people are unashamedly, I only like the Pacific Theater, Woody. I don't watch your Eastern Front stuff. Some people are, I get that. I completely get that. Yeah. I don't really have an explanation as to why there's a definite viewer drop with women guests, except thinking the worst, except it is people going, yeah, I don't want to listen to her because she's a woman. I can't believe that's the case. Yeah. But something has to explain it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I don't know the answer to it either, but I know that I live it.
Yeah.
I do in its own way. And I think that, I don't know a solution for it, except that we all just keep going forward. I mean, certainly you having women on your guests is you championing, helping to kind of open the door for women. I saw Ben's comment a moment ago about Ledger's
Liberation Tour.
Yeah. And, everybody just doing their bit, and that's how things change.
I mean, it will all normalize, wasn't it? I mean, I grew up in the 80s when, and we're going down a massive rabbit hole now. It was the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. It was a lot of prejudice. There were people on TV, Boy George and Culture Club and Breaking Down. I mean, it had been going back since David Bowie back in the 60s and all the makeup and stuff. But I lived through that era where just homosexuality was very, very weird. And now it's not anything like as weird now, 30, 40 years on. Now there are different issues that people are scared about initially. But, my stepdaughters who are French and modern and young and kind of feminist, and they kind of roll their eyes when I talk about the difficulties of military history. But I go, yeah, but we're moving. We're in a different lane again, where our lane is moving forward, but it's not going to be the same as what it's like for people in their 20s in Paris, because it's not the same competition. But how will we change? Just keep on moving forward and not focus on it, not talk about it too much, and just keep making it normal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one way to do it. There's a million ways to slice an apple, right?
Yeah.
So we all do it the way that we're comfortable. And for me, it's just acknowledging that men are wonderful and men have been seriously supportive of me. And also, I have had experiences in my life that haven't really met that description, but I think we can focus in on this is men being crap to women, or we can also just say, look, as humans, we really need to open our minds, because, I see men beating the crap out of men in comments on Twitter or X or whatever. I see women beating the crap out of women. Like, it's people have an intolerance to anything they think is, you know, outside of their norm. And I think therein lies the bigger issue.
Yeah, I mean that definitely, and one we're not going to cure in a chat online right now. There are bigger, deeper things about people's just hostility and anger in the world right now. But I think we've done enough about the kind of the challenges of being a woman in history. One question I want to go back to that Peter O'Connell asked earlier on, and it's about your visits to the archives. How does a historian sift reality from the writings of the people who experienced it? Because that's something. When you are not so much with the official things like the morning reports, but things like diaries, things about that are written by people about things. How do you determine the truth, if that isn't a weird word, about history? Because people's interpretations are true to them. Is there anything that any kind of advice on that particular subject of the hidden meanings, if you like, in the written word?
I love this question. Peter, thank you so much for asking this question. I have a lot to say about this. One of the things I didn't mention in my presentation is that I cut my teeth on military records by encountering a probable case of pretty mighty truth stretching.
Right.
And I had to learn how to read military paperwork in order to determine what the truth was. And so from the get-go, I learned the hard way that just because somebody says something doesn't mean it's true. And this is why I'm obsessed with paperwork and archives, because you can tell me whatever you want to tell me about yourself or dad or grandpa, and I'll respect the family tradition with all of my heart. And I do mean that, because I have stuff like this in my own grandfather's wars. And at the same time, I'm going to find the paperwork wherever it is, if it's on the divisional level, if it's in the, you know, OMPF or the morning reports, I'm going to find it. And I've tracked stuff like this down so much and found stuff in the most random places. Like, for example, a family knew their dad had been wounded in the war, but they did not know how, because he just would not talk about it. And so I can't remember the exact sequence of events, but I ended up finding a diary that mentioned this veteran by name and said, I watched so-and-so get hit by a strafing plane today. We were bivouacking, blah, blah, blah. And so, there's step one. And then I actually ended up finding out that veteran was alive and connected the veteran with the sons. And the veteran told the sons what happened to dad. And then I went and found the morning report after. That was that sequence. And the morning report backed it all up. So it's those archival military level documents that can really back up the story. And you can hit that from a whole bunch of different angles too. It doesn't have to come straight from the morning report, if that makes sense.
But that's where we're coming back to the empathy thing, because there's a particular researcher, I won't name him, but he's one of the ones involved in a lot of these cases where they're unmasking World War II veterans, some of whom have passed for stolen valor, getting trips to Europe, claiming they were this, when in fact they weren't this, they were that. And the thing is, the particular gentleman I'm thinking about, who I did used to know quite well, but he cut me off and I'm on his list of people he doesn't like now. The information he unearths is rarely wrong, but he seems to have zero understanding of the effect it can have on families. And there's at the one end of this, and stolen valor, even those two words, which are very American to me, we've started to use it in the UK as well. It has a lot of connotations of it sounds really odd, and we can all think of those cases of youngish people around now who claim they were a Navy SEAL or an SAS person. It's to get employment, it's to lie, it's to get personal, or to deceive some poor woman out of her savings. At that end, there's a horrible criminality behind it. Then at the other end, we all know the veteran who just, as he tells the story, that the number of Germans he was shooting at rises a little bit from 2 or 3 to 5 or 6. But a particular friend of mine, Omaha veteran Harley Reynolds, wonderful guy, when he would I would meet up with my group, so I would have to say, Harley, this is the Normandy version, not your kind of lectures to people to, you know, and so yeah, because the one tank would become 3 tanks. Now that's innocent, it's just embellishment, it's storytelling flair.
Right.
I feel we're going to be on the brink of almost an epidemic, as the veterans will be almost all gone within a few years, of the family members and descendants telling perhaps exaggerated versions of their father, their grandmothers, their fathers. How do you think, as a researcher, we will have to process this era of fake history, but it's not intentional fake history?
Follow the documents.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the documents are there. They are. And it's, you know, kindness and, oh, really? He sounds like your dad sounds like he was an amazing, what a hero, truly. He was in the war. He did his bit. He picked up a gun. That's a lot, right?
Yeah.
And you said it at the beginning just now, Paul. It's that there's a big difference between criminal intent, which is fraud, and, you know, a family. Like, here's an example. I had heard growing up that my grandfather was shot in the butt in, like, the Pacific. That's what I heard from my, you know, it trickled down. And he wasn't. Like, there's no Purple Heart, no wound. There was no wound. Like, where did that come from? Did my grandfather lie? I doubt it. I think my aunt and uncles probably heard, you know, the story of somebody else getting shot in the butt and conflated it. And that, you always have to keep your mind open to how and why people say what they say and where the information came from. But it's very different when somebody is intending to cause or commit some kind of fraudulent experience.
I mean, the classic one we get, and I've said this before on WW2TV, is with people assuming that everybody who came ashore in Normandy did so on June the 6th.
Yeah.
And they will contact a tour guide or research, say, my granddad was in the and they came ashore in Normandy on June the 6th on Utah Beach, and they tell me the unit, and it's the 79th Division, it's the 99th, it's the 42nd, whatever it would be. And you go, no, they absolutely did come ashore on Utah Beach, but we're talking about July, August, September, October, November. And you can sense that, even if it's via email, you can sense the faces drop, because they've understood that Granddad was on Utah Beach, and Granddad absolutely was on Utah Beach, but Granddad died ages ago, and somehow the family, because they've heard of Utah Beach as being D-Day, they've added the D-Day bit. The veteran didn't say D-Day, and then that's the process of going through the, as you made clear earlier, the empathetic stage. So as you said, no, he would have fought in this battle here. Let me tell you about the Colmar Pocket. Let me tell you about this battle here. Let me tell you about what he'd have experienced in the Hurtgen Forest. Forget D-Day. D-Day in some ways was a cakewalk compared to what your grandfather went through. And I'm not saying that to generate. I'm saying it to make their family stories somehow seem relevant, because there is this expectation that to be a proper hero, you've got to have performed in particular actions and days. And the records say that the majority of people who served their country didn't serve in these seminal moments, because those seminal moments are actually outnumbered by the ordinary days of combat, if that makes sense.
Yep, it does make sense. And I think, you know, that's where doing your due diligence really pays off, because if the family thinks that, you know, Grandpa came in on D-Day, but, you know, he fought in all these other places, you know, you just bullet pointed down the list, and you can say, listen, that was the coldest winter.
Yeah.
The fact that he survived that winter, like, can you imagine? Like, what a hero. He showed up, he did his duty, he didn't go AWOL. He did, this country owes you and your grandpa for what he did.
We're repeating ourselves, but it's showing empathy, it's showing care, it's treating every case as individual, not going in with blinkers and assuming that what we're going to find is going to be what you are going to find, and expect the unexpected, and then handle it with humanity when you're dealing with the family or the person who's investigating. Well, it's been fantastic talking to you. And I did say at one point you should come on and talk about because you've got a favorite division. You've done YouTube documentaries about it, so we haven't covered that yet. For those who don't know, you've done a particular work on which division is it?
the Rainbow Division, 42nd. Yep. Yeah, I've been working with the 42nd Division since 2018, and it's a slow roll labor of love, but it's an amazing division.
Yeah, and there are so many units that just do not get the attention because the Hollywood movie didn't happen. They didn't have the best-selling memoir. They didn't have that person who was the ambassador for them. They didn't have the reunions after war. And they all, as we said, they all did their bit. And, you know, literally millions of people served their country, and many of them in a role that we even people like ourselves who do have a broad understanding, we're learning every day about the multitude of roles. I didn't know till yesterday, and that was Holly Guys being on, that there were 300 military installations in Alaska in World War II, 300 separate, and so that's thousands of people who were serving in the US military, who were in Alaska, who were doing their part of the role. I had no idea. So
my grandpa was one of them.
Well, there we are. There, it all connects. So we've got loads of requests to bring you back. Definitely come back. A fantastic presentation from Willie there. Wonderful presentation from Mr. Frick and Franken. So we'll bring you back. But again, folks, don't forget to check out Erin's websites. And I should just say, Erin got me some archives for my forthcoming book so I'm one of the satisfied customers as well, which is really cool. So I've got those archives to work through. So folks, the only show tomorrow on Valentine's on the 13th is early in the morning in the UK, 6 a.m. or late at night in the USA. I'm talking to Jeffrey Plowman about the battle in Greece in 1941. So check that one out. And then another one on Friday, we're talking about alcohol. So as always, buy my guest books, go to their websites, consider becoming a patron or a channel member of World War II TV, and I will see you all again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.